Welcome back, everybody. This is the third session of the day for security, and it gives me. I'll introduce our speaker in a moment. Who'll be by no means no stranger to GSE. If you attended previous sessions today, just a quick reminder: don't forget to leave your feedback. That would be great. I'm just making sure my co-pilot has disappeared, Mrs. Parsons. So I'm looks like I'm steering the ship. So I'm just keeping an eye on the waiting room to make sure that we haven't missed anybody. No, we've got everybody in. That's great. Right. So welcome back, Mark. So for those of you who don't know, Mark Nelson, he's from IBM, from Poughkeepsie, and he's in the RACF development team. And Mark's been attending GSE for a long time now, doing lots of sessions for us, and he's going to be giving us a RACF update today. And I'm pleased to say that from last year, Mark actually joined our security working group committee as our IBM rep. So we're very, very pleased to have him. So Mark, this is the 60-minute countdown. So your session.
My reputation precedes me.
Yes, welcome back.
It is good to be here. Good afternoon, everybody, or if you're in another time zone, good morning, good noon, good evening, whatever it might be. So this is the RACF update, or what the heck has the RACF development team been doing in the last couple of months. We are here in beautiful Poughkeepsie on the shores of the Hudson River. Absolutely beautiful place. Nice day today. Magnificently sunny yesterday. The blue arrow points to Building 707, where my colleagues and I work happily on RACF, or ZOS Security Server, and other associated things for ZOS. We've got a lot to talk about. And in fact, there are, I think, 19 different things that we have introduced since we made generally available ZOS 2.5. ZOS 2.5 was 2 years and change ago. But I understand not everybody jumps on the absolute latest release of ZOS. I got it. Not everybody puts every PTF, even the cool new function ones, on as soon as they are available. I got it. So whether you are at the latest release with all the service or not, there's a bunch of things of which you should be aware. And that's the purpose of this session. I welcome questions as we're going along. I probably can't see them. So if you enter them in the chat, Jamie or one of his cohorts will notice it and bring it to my attention, and we can have a conversation. And I do enjoy conversations. And if I get to go in November, we can have lots of in-person conversations. So what's happening? ZOS 3.1 enhancements. A couple of things in here. This first one is actually very recent. I believe the APAR for this closed only 2 weeks ago, so PTFs are just available. And with APAR OA 65002, or more specifically, the PTFs for that, there's actually two related APARs, but that's the primary one. You'll drag in the other one. RACF can now accept, verify, import, and export PKCS12 packages that are encrypted or protected in a slightly different manner, specifically the PBES2 and PKDF2 format, password-based encryption scheme 2 with, you can read the text there. The major enhancement was the ability to create these as well as list them. So there were enhancements to RAC dsert list, for example, a couple of other things. RAC dsert export is enhanced with a new keyword. That keyword is PBE with the only possible sub-value of AES. And when you specify that, you get this new encryption format for that exported key object. Apple audit. This is something that's been on folks' lists for a very long time. This is a 3.1 only, and it's in the base of 3.1, so there's no APAR associated with this. The requirement here is I would like to log all times that a RAC route request equals verify is performed. Simple requirement, but understand that when request equals verifies are done, the requester has some control. They could say log equals none. They could say log equals as is. They could say log equals all. And only the log equals all ones would have been logged by default by RACF. If most folks simply said log equals as is. And in that case, prior to 3.1, well, there actually was a way that you could cause logging to occur, but it was somewhat incomplete, right? And that was through the use of Setorop's Apple audit. Setorop's Apple audit was actually designed specifically for APPC kinds of transactions. It turns out that if you specified Apple audit, in some cases, you could actually see log records that would otherwise have been invisible. And that some clients realize this. So in 3.1, Bruce Wells and a bunch of other folks basically made the function more complete and tested it so we could actually be assured that it actually works the way it's supposed to. And the way it works is if you specify Setorop's Apple audit, right, and logging has been requested on the Apple APPL, right, on the request equals verify, then logging will occur. Now, prior to this, Unix System Services calls, sessions equals OMVS SRV, were excluded for this. They are still excluded, but you have the option of enabling logging for them by creating a profile, applelaudit.for.unix, in the opt audit class. There's a new class for that. Opt audit, applelaudit.for.unix, and the mere presence of that profile will enable logging for session equals OMVS SRV applications, which are traditionally ZOS Unix 1. There's some additional infrastructure that Bruce and team needed to do to make this happen. There's some enhancements to the RACF subsystem. So, everybody should be starting the RACF subsystem, if for nothing else, so you can get RACF commands from the operator console, which can be a lifesaver. If you have an environment where TSO can't start because of a security change, well, you can log onto the console and then correct whatever that problem might have been with a RACF command. The RACF subsystem has been enhanced to listen for a very specific ENF signal, ENF62, which indicates that a security option, something in the opt audit class, has changed. Right, so that's the base function. And another thing they put in that was really quite useful, if you had been getting log off records, so that would be a rack route request equals verify enver equals delete, right? If in that request, you would get a record if you said log equals all. What was missing from that was the Apple ID value. Well, they decided to add that in, and that's a good thing as well, right? So lots of things of interest in Apple audit. Next topic. Oh, yes,
Mark,
question.
Sorry to interrupt. Just a quick question there, because
Yeah.
I vested interest in this one around the Unix one, which is really, really good. Is there anything in there for like for SSH authentication? Do you know? Does that cover it?
So that's a great question. My limited understanding of SSH is that the SSH that I have personally used to connect is, SSH from, and you specify a user ID and password.
Yeah.
Right. I'm assuming that goes through those kinds of functions, but I've never personally seen a record. I will have to go and test and validate and see if it does.
Okay. Thank you.
Great question. If any of the IBMers are on and know the answer, chime in now. It's a team effort. All right, ACE custom fields. So we introduced custom fields. I think it was one of the most popular things we did, possibly 10 years ago. And the concept here is you could create your own fields and associate them with RACF profiles simply by creating profiles in some various classes, the C field class in particular. So that's been around. People love it. But one of the requirements we had was we would like to have information in a user profile. We would like it placed into storage at the time the ACE is created for that user. And you can do that starting in ZOS 3.1. And the way you do that is when you're defining the field for that user profile, that custom field for that user profile. So the example there of our defined C field, user.csdata.empsir, everything else in there other than the ACEES keyword is existing support. But if you say ACEES, then what RACF will do is extract that field or those fields and put them in storage pointed to by the ACE, pointed to from the ACE. That's great. So it's in storage. What can you do with it? Well, we have a callable service, an extension to a callable service, an existing callable service. It's rgetInfo. Has a new function code called get CS data, get custom field data from the ACE. The usual sets of authorizations will apply to this. We do on a field level access checking. Authorized callers can optionally skip the FLAC check. And authorized callers can also point to a particular ACE from which they want to extract that custom field information, which was stored in the custom field and brought into storage at the time that ACE was created. It's a fairly straightforward call. The only thing new there is that new value, or actually new function code, and the new value of 003. And then, do you want all fields? Do you just want a single field? Do you want to suppress FLAC as field level access checking? Right, straightforward, and it's really intended for those environments where you have an ACE that has been created, and now your application needs access to some particular piece of information contained within that ACE. Right. So those things were delivered in 3.1 or on 3.1 only. Right. Let's talk about the other things that we've introduced as part of continuous delivery that roll back to earlier releases, 2.5, once or twice, possibly to 2.4. All right. First one, this is an interesting one. We have been on a bit of a mission, as has everybody, to eliminate places where DES has been used. And so for RACF passwords, for example, the KDF AES support has been around, I think, now for 10 years. If you're not using it, you should be. Maybe Bob Hansel will do another survey and see how prevalent that actually is. But the kinks that people were worried about 10 years ago, in my mind, have all been resolved. You really should be on KDF AES. But there are these passwords that they're kind of a very special use ones. These are the RVary passwords, the RVary switch, as an example, password. Now, these are or part of the support, could be and would be only DES encrypted, DES protected, whatever words you want to use for it. And that's an issue for a lot of folks. But I'll also point out that these passwords have a very specific purpose. And the purpose is that when somebody says, I want to inactivate a RACF data set, or I want to switch my primary and backup RACF data set, we needed an authentication mechanism, an authorization mechanism, I should say, that didn't require access to the RACF data set, because the reason why you're doing the RVary switch is because there's something wrong potentially with the RACF data set. And I'll be honest with you, I think it's been a very long time since I remember a client actually having a problem that would require an RVary switch. The hardware has just gotten so reliable, that's really not an issue. Software occasionally does have its burps, but even there, it's a rare event. So what this APAR 65905 will let you do is it will let you specify that I want KDF AES to be used for the encryption of the RVary passwords. So a couple of things about this. Number one, do not enable this until you have put the PTFs for OA 65905 onto all systems which are sharing your RACF database. Just don't do that. Right. If you do, the down level systems won't be able to use that password. Right. So that's the caution there. But if you should accidentally do that, what this doesn't change is the fact that the string yes, the password yes, will work from any console which has master authority. So that's the break glass in case of something going wrong kind of thing. Right. This does not change the ability to specify yes from a console with master authority. Right. But once you've got all of the systems sharing your RACF database with this PTF on, you can go out and change your RACF RVary switch password or your RVary enact password to a different, could be the same value. We really don't care. Right. But the act of changing it will cause it to be encrypted using KDF AES. Now, as soon as you put the service on, you will notice a difference. This is very unusual for us because normally we try to introduce service in a way that's quiet and doesn't really announce its presence. This one will announce its presence as soon as you IPL after you've applied the PTFs for 65905. What you're going to see is what you would have seen before. Installation defined RVary password is in effect for the switch function and for the status function. But you'll see an additional line that says KDF AES password conversion is pending. And for the very, very first time, we'll see an APAR in a message ID. It'll say C APAR 65905. Right, so that's your trigger that, oh, wait a second, I might be able to improve my security posture. Again, once all the systems you have are sharing the RACF data set. And once you do that, when you do the setup rvari password, either switch or status, and you put on the KDF AES keyword, we will convert the password, or we'll store the password, I should say, in KDF AES format. And now the message will say installation defined rvari switch KDF AES password is in effect. So easy to log, easy enough to enable. You just go out and you have to make sure all your systems have the service applied. The radmin service, IRSec00, it's an API that you can use to extract information out of the RACF environment, and that will tell you, if you should choose to use it, whether the service is there, whether in fact you've converted to KDF AES. So KDF AES default for rvari passwords. All right, move on to identity token support. We've had identity tokens in RACF for a couple of releases, and the concept here is a transportable token, kind of like a RACF environment object, but different based on a different set of standards, that you can pass in that says, hey, this represents X. And then RACF can take that token and create an ACE that represents X. I said it's based on a standard. That's the JSON Web Token, IETFs, and the RFC is listed right there. And it's generated during rack route request equals verify processing based on some profiles in the IDT data class, right? But the concept here was you could only create the JSON Web Token doing a rack route request equals verify, enver equals create, and you couldn't create it for a protected user. And that's what we're changing in ZOS 3.1 and in ZOS 2.4 and 2.5 with the APAR listed there, 634, 6.2, and 634, 6.3. Right. Once those are installed, you can generate one of these identity tokens, JSON Web Token. We sometimes call them JOTs. You can create it from an existing ACEE, and you can create one of these JSON Web Tokens for a protected user. Couldn't used to do that. Now, there is a parameter, a new parameter in the IDT parms set of definition for a particular for the environment, saying, can I go out and create JOTs for protected users? And it's a yes, no, and it's for the particular user. The other thing you can do is you can generate an IDT, a JSON Web Token, from an existing ACE using the init ACE service. So you can do it from request equals verify, passing in the ACE, or you can do it through init ACE. All right, passphrase change interval. Passphrases have been around for a while. One of the things we didn't give you, though, is the ability to have a passphrase change interval. Oh, we gave you one. It just had to be the same as your password interval. And to be honest with you, you got to think about that and say, why? Why would you make someone change their passphrase, which is longer and far more resilient to a brute force attack? Why would you make folks change it at the same frequency for which they have to change a password? There were some emerging standards. One of the NIST standards came out and said, no, that's not appropriate. Password phrases should have a much longer span. So we finally gave that support. It's in ZOS 3.1 base, rolled back to ZOS 2.5 with the APARs and PTFs listed there. So what we have is a separate passphrase specific interval. Phrase int is the keyword, which can be different from the password interval. Of course, it can be different. That's why we're giving it to you. And not only is it different in terms of the fact it can be a different value, but the size of that value can be different as well. It can go from 0, which means not specified, all the way to 65534, which if you do your power of 2 kinds of conversion, you say, I know where that value came from. But it's 179 years. So yeah, could you get a password phrase so it effectively never changes? Yeah, you could. I don't know if you'd want to, but you can. So one of the things that one should realize is who can set the passphrase interval for a user. I'm going to point out there's an interesting thing that historic in RACF. When you look at password intervals, there was a system level option, and then you could set a password interval per user. And users could set their own password intervals. They still can, right? The system is smart enough. RACF is smart enough to say if the user makes it longer than the system one, well, I'm going to use the system one. So the user could ratchet up their own security, but they couldn't make it less secure because RACF would use the right value from the system level one versus the individual one. For password phrase interval, users cannot specify their own passphrase interval. It has to be done by somebody with special, group special, or the usual sets of suspects and authorities. So unlike a password interval, users cannot set their own password phrase interval. So we have a health check that looks at password intervals and password phrase intervals now. So in 3.1, that check will raise an exception if the passphrase interval is greater than 365. All right, some other ancillary changes with this: RACF SMF unload and RACF database unload were both, SMF unload was updated to support the fact that this new passphrase interval value can be in the SMF record. It's an SMF 80 type record, and the SMF 81 record will contain the password phrase interval as well. Now, there is a consideration with RACF remote sharing facility. What happens if you have an RRSF node which has the ability to have a separate passphrase interval, and that command to set that passphrase interval, the command that creates that interval, is propagated to an RSF system which does not have support for that? RSF already has some facilities to handle cases like that. We have down level systems. And what you end up with here is a message, IRRI 007, that, hey, a local node, a node to which something is being forwarded, has a different setup password option than the partner node. So that's your alert. The up level systems will see that alert about the down level systems. So it's not going to work. Sorry about that. The solution there: get your RS environment to talking to all up-level systems with this support. Questions on any of that? All right. Coffee is needed. All right, let's talk about a new RACF emitted SMF record. The first thing folks will look at that and say, wow, SMF 1154. I wonder if that's a typo. The answer is no. A few years ago, our friends over in the systems management facility in the BCP and SMF introduced the ability to have SMF records greater than the number 255, right? So there's a whole extended SMF ID thing that came out a few years ago. And folks are starting to use it. And one of the reasons, one of the places that is using it is something called the IBM Z Security and Compliance Center, ZSCC. The concept of ZSCC is fairly straightforward. What this is an application program product that accepts log records written by participating products, aggregates them, summarizes them, and then raises alerts based on policies that the installation has set. So RACF is one of these participating products. What RACF does is we create SMF 1154 subtype 83, a very specific subtype which is assigned to RACF. Nobody else creates an 1154 83. Other products have their own specific subtypes, right? Applications that want to get access to that data, just like the ZSCC does, well, there's a ZOSMF REST API that can be used. And RACF will create these records upon demand, a request that comes in through that REST API environment. Now, we fully document what's in the RACF 1154 subtype 83 record. It's there in RACF macros and interfaces. And since I love RACF's SMF records, we just describe them very briefly here. The SMF 1154-83 record has a couple of sections associated with it. The first one is called the RACF summary section, RACF SMRY, and that has setter ops information, is IBM user defined and revoked, Do you have S audit, command violation, all the things specified in that top box on the right? Right. So it's basically a snapshot of the security information on your environment. The next section is RACF critical general resources. Right. So these are things like bpx.superuser or other assorted RACF profiles that will grant somebody an extraordinary authority. And what will be contained in the SMF record is the UAC, the ID splat entry, information, the warning, is the profile in warning mode? What are the audit options, G-audit options? Somebody may look at that and say, wow, that's very similar to what's produced by the RACF Sensitive Resources Health Check. And it is, right? That was the model for the information that folks might consider important in that ZSCC environment in terms of understanding how the system is configured. The third section is RACF APFL, and APFL is a bit of a misnomer. Yes, this will contain APF data sets, but it'll also contain information about other critical data sets. Same basic information, the UAC ID splat warning settings for APF, of course, the RACF data sets, linked list, RSF, and PARM-lib data sets. Right. And then the last thing that's in there is any information about any programs which are defined in the RACF authorized caller table. It's interesting. We've been saying for 35 years you should have no entries in the RACF authorized caller table. We still see people with them. So not many, but it's yeah. So this will rat you out. All right. The next thing, VSAM support and encrypted VSAM support for a RACF data set. So in ZOS 2.5, we introduced support that allowed you to have a VSAM dataset as your RACF dataset or as a RACF dataset. It was a VSAM linear dataset for those who care about the gory details, but there were a bunch of restrictions. In ZOS 2.5, the RACF dataset could not be shared, could not be split, could not be SMS managed. You could not be in Sysplex communications mode. You could not be in RACF data sharing mode, right? There were a lot of restrictions. Oh, wait, there are some more. Everything sharing the RACF data set had to be at ZOS 2.5 or later. Your data set could not be defined in master JCL. You must be running an application identity mapping stage 3 in order to use a VSAM data set. And your data set should be free from errors, right? You should run UT200 and database unload. They should run without error. Right. With APAR OA 62267, we enabled the encryption and we removed all of those restrictions that are crossed out in blue. Now, this is old news in a way. June of 2022 is almost 2 years ago, 2 months shy of being from 2 years ago. But we're still, just letting folks know that you can now safely encrypt your RACF database. But as I tell everyone, encrypting any data set means you have to have a fair amount of setup already completed and tested. In particular, your disaster recovery to make sure that your system master keys are properly being shared with your DR environment. But this was 2.5 enhancement that came post GA. Just a few words about that VSAM data set. When you use VSAM, pretty much nothing changes from the application viewpoint. No matter how you get information out of RACF, whether it's a callable service or a RACF command or the RAC route request equals whatever, or yes, even a Chinty, everything stays exactly the same. We made no changes to the RACF serialization structure. So we actually defined VSAMs, the RACF dataset to VSAM, and we say VSAM RACF is responsible for all the serialization, but you do get an additional RACF, should be a sysvsam enqueue. It's sysvsam. It's the catalog name concatenated with the data set name. And normally, I'm not a big fan of more serialization, but this serialization actually has a really, really nice side effect. And that is it prevents you from deleting a RACF data set while it's in use. And folks who have been in RACF for a number of years may have heard horror stories or experienced a situation when RACF is its own access manager. It does not do sysdsn enqueues. And you might have a data management product that decides that, oh, this data set, well, nobody's using it because there's no enqueue. I'm going to move it to some other volume for whatever reasons it might want to do that. When that happens, hilarity ensues, or the hilarity of somebody deleting that data set can't happen anymore. Now, the one caution, and I have yet to see a place where this played out as being an actual concern in the 2 years we've done this, but if you are reading the RACF database directly, that is, you're opening the data set and then reading it for whatever purpose, and there were some vendor products, or there are some vendor products that do this, then you might have to take an action. Now, we notified all the vendors, and the two that I know of that had this concern addressed it before ZOS 2.5 actually became generally available. But you happen to have an application that's reading it for whatever reason, you may have to do something if you're using a VSAM RACF dataset. Might not, but you might. All right, let's move on. Special user password revocation prompt. This was something that RACF introduced a number of years, a number of years ago. RACF introduced I think we did it in the server stream, but the ability, right, to not have special users revoked if that special user comes up with, enters the wrong password more than N times, right? And the N is the value that you specified for the number of sequential invalid attempts that will result in a revocation, right? So that's a Setup password revoke. Now, years and years ago, we put in processing that says if the special user is about to be revoked, we're going to put a prompt on the console that says maximum password attempts by special user ID at terminal whatever is occurring. Should we allow another attempt, right? Or should you allow another attempt? Reply Y or N. Y says, yep, let them do it again. Don't revoke them. And N says, no, revoke them. They've exceeded their welcome here. Boom, stop them right here and now. The challenge with this is there were single-threaded products that when you put up the prompt, the processing of these products for other users was blocked. So we now give you a way to control that. I would suggest only enabling this if you happen to have a product that has this issue. With APAR 63091 that rolled all the way back to 2.3, because this is about a year old, you can disable that additional logon attempt for special users once that seturop's revoke NNN value has been exceeded. You can control this on an application by application value basis. So if you happen to have only one application for which this is a problem, great. You just have to know the application name. And the way you do it is there is an existence check done for a profile in the xFacility class. Why the xFacility class? Oh, you will see in a moment. The name of this profile is irr.deny.special.user.additional.password.attempts.apple.insert the application name. Yes, ladies and gentlemen, I think we have the first RACF resource facility class profile that's a syntactically correct sentence, right? And the reason why it had to be xFacility is the limitation on a facility class profile is 39 characters. So it was so long, we had to make it xFacility. That should make no difference. The xFacility class has been around since ZOS 1.4, a very, very long time. Now, that application name must match the Apple equals value that's passed in on the request equals verify. Right? If it is not passing in an Apple equal value on the request equals verify, then we will generate the application name using the same derivation mechanism that we use for pass tickets, right? And that's documented in the RACF Security Administrator's Guide. And that profile check, it's existence check only. All those other things, UAC access list, things like that, logging really don't matter. It's just if the profile exists, for this particular application, Apple name must be fully specified. You can't put a generic character in there. And a user attempts to log on from that application and exceeds the number of invalid password attempts, then you can suppress that ability to ask the question, should we give them another chance? Questions on that? All right, let's talk a little bit about a race on.
I was going to say, Mark, I wish that would have been available at the last shop that I worked at, because I think it was a weekly occurrence when someone from you, from the security team, was logging on to TPX. was always an issue there, but I guess some of the other session managers suffer from the same. Do they? is it single threaded, something like that, where they're, yeah,
It's
yeah.
and it's not just session managers. There were other I can't say offenders. These were choices made that maybe now are not optimal.
Okay,
But
got you. Yeah.
cool. But thank you. And now I know an example of one that did it, or another example. That's cool.
Yeah.
So cool. So let's talk a little bit about a race on Scratch. So back in the 1985, 6, 7 timeframe, RACF introduced something called a race on Scratch. And it wasn't RACF introducing, it was RACF stored some information that the access method could sit and retrieve and say, oh, when this data set is deleted or space is released from this data set, I want to physically get rid of the data. I want to erase the data. In the old days, it meant going out and writing a DFSMS, DFP would actually send a channel command down with a whole bunch of zeros on it. Right, so it tied up the channel. So it was IO requested to do it, and it was it worked. We'll just leave it at that. And for the truly paranoid, it worked great. A little later on, hardware advanced, and they instead of having to send a bunch of zeros down, there was a channel command called locate record and erase. So you didn't have to send the data, but you had to send the cylinder head record, and probably it's a cylinder and head information, and it would do it a track at a time, right? But it would do it a track at a time, right? So if you had a really big data set, there were a lot of CCWs being flooded down to that device. In ZOS 2.1, a change was made in the underlying infrastructure that said, no, you don't have to do it one at a time. We can bundle those up into, I think it's 255 at a time. And in ZOS 2.2, that limit was increased to 12,240. And a couple of folks did some articles talking about the performance of this. It did make a big difference. Watson and Walker had some articles in their analysis newsletter, and it spoke very positively about this. Well, there's another enhancement that has nothing to do with RACF, but I'm just letting you know about it. Right, it has to do with DFP. DFP, by the way, stands for Data Facility Product. Think of it as the access method. It and the DS8900 solid state device with a specific microcode level have come up with another way to make erasure a lot faster. And the way it works is, let's face it, we all think about 3380s and 3390s, and I just use the phrase cylinder head and record because that's how a System 360, 370 mainframe person, ZOS person thinks of IO. But those devices, 3380s and 3390s, haven't been manufactured in years, right? What we have is some other kind of technology, SCSI technology, SSD technology, it doesn't matter, right? We have another technology that emulates what a 3380 and a 3390 looks for. So somewhere in that device is a mapping between this cylinder, this head, and this record, and some other thing. Well, that mapping table is an intriguing thing in the sense that if you can remove elements from that tracking table, right, you've effectively removed the mainframe's ability to get to that data. Now the only threat that you have to mediate is somebody physically disassembling, having hardware access to it and physically disassembling something, pulling something apart. You no longer have to worry about the case of, oh, if you allocate a data set, right, fill it with data, and then delete the data set, right, that data is still logically out in that device and it's still mapped, right? And so somebody who has the ability to request that space by perhaps allocating a new data set in that space would be able to see that. If you remove the mapping table entries, that ability goes away. And that's exactly what's been done here. They call it unmap support. And the concept of unmap is instead of having to go out and physically go out and erase things, we're simply going to remove entries in that mapping table. So there's no longer a logical connection that an application can use to retrieve that data. That's fabulous, right? This will apply to any data set which has an erase indicator in the RACF profile, and it also applies to temporary data sets. Wow, that's pretty cool. What that says is you don't have to say set ops erase all anymore. You can simply enable this, right? Put your temporary data sets on this device, and you'll eliminate a substantial portion of the threat of somebody simply allocating some temporary data sets and then just reading what was there. So how does, there's a very important restriction on this. It does not apply to any data set that's in any form of a copy services relationship. Copy services is one of the things that's used by some of the data movement products to allow the synchronization of data, like GDPS and things like that. So doesn't apply to those. There's an RFE out saying that we want this limitation removed. If you think that's a good idea, concur with that RFE or idea or whatever we call those things now. Now, how do you enable the support? It's enabled with a facility class profile of the name stgadmin.sms.dadsdom.unmap.prefer. So if that profile is present and the data set is marked for erasure, either by the setterops option, setterops erase, or the dataset profile itself, and that data resides on a device that supports this, then it will be unmapped instead of erased, right? In cases other than that, we'll do the traditional erasure. I said hexadecimal 00 overwrite. It's really not that. My apologies. Now, what this means is if you were to define your SMS environment, system managed storage environment, to point your data set, your temporary data set allocations to one of these devices, then you would get the benefits of setterops erase all for temporary data sets without having to specify setterops erase all, right? So it's a much higher performance way to get a substantial portion of the benefit of data erasure without the overhead of actually having to physically overwrite the stuff. So that's again, it's not a RACF enhancement, but it's some interesting. I actually had to go to Share to find out about this, but we get first made aware of it. And yeah, it's we've been talking about it in IBM for years, and our friends in DFP shipped it about 2 years ago. Here's all the documentation, pointers to some of the articles, including the one in the Cheryl Watson's tuning newsletter. If you're a Share representative, the Share presentation from Atlanta is quite excellent as well. Oh, and there's a link if you want to concur with that requirement. All right. Any questions on that? Going once. All right, let's move on. This one is a very straightforward one because it's just IBM saying no, right? And the no is something that we used to say yes to, but our friends over in ZVM, for very valid technical reasons, have said they can no longer support sharing a RACF dataset with ZOS. So effective with ZVM 7.3, ZOS and ZVM will not be able to share a RACF dataset. If you attempt to IPL one in ZVM 7.3, it will fail, and you'll get a message to the operator saying, please specify a valid RACF dataset. There's the APAR this comes with. All right. CIS benchmark. We had an interesting discussion about these at the, I guess it was one of the working group meetings. The Center for Internet Security is an organization community-driven that is attempting to create standards for various and sundry environments. One of those environments is ZOS and RACF. And in fact, they introduced a ZOS and RACF benchmark about a year and change ago. We just updated it again last October. That benchmark contains 219 recommendations across 9 domains, which are listed there. If you would like to get a copy of this free benchmark, the link is there. The only thing that's weird about it is you have to give it an email address. Yes, they want to track who's getting these things. And then they mail you the links for the PDF. They just announced or released, I should say, a ZOS DB213 benchmark. I haven't taken a look at it, but it's there. So take a look at that. Key thing I want to point out about this is it's community driven. Unlike certain other standards, this is STIGs, which it's somebody simply saying this is the standard, and if you disagree with us, too bad. This is one where we've gotten feedback about, no, this is too restrictive, this is too permissive, and some of the work going on is going to be to figure out exactly how to respond to those. And this one is ZOS for, it's IBM ZOS 2.5 with RACF. The next iteration will not be tied to a particular ZOS release. Right. What we'll do is in the recommendation itself, we'll say something like this only applies to ZOS 3.1 or ZOS 3, ZNext, whatever the next one is. So check it out. I think it will be of interest. There was a session which sadly conflicted with a session I needed to attend for work reasons, but it was an SDSF update by Rob Scott. I don't know if he talked about this functionality in SDSF, but I just think it's very cool.
He
In
did talk about it, yeah.
Oh, good,
Yeah.
good. So go to his set, go to the video for his session if you didn't attend. Get the handouts. But I love the fact that in SDSF for ZOS 3.1, they've introduced some functionality that allows you to browse RACF information, profile definitions, system definitions. It's fabulous. Really enjoy it. Fun to play with. And one of the things I'm going to point out for those of you who like to automate things, SDSF has a very rich Rex interface. So if you wanted to get some of this information, you can get to it. Yeah. So you see the connections. All right, let's talk for a few moments about some of the statements of direction which have appeared recently, or not so recently. First one is validated boot. The concept of validated boot is clients wanted, and at least one standard, and the one that's mentioned here, the NIAP OS protection profile 4.3, which is our basis of one of our common criteria evaluations. That said, you must have the ability to have the machine, the operating system, validate that the pieces that it uses to build itself, right, have not been altered. We call it validated boot. In the protection profile, they call it trusted boot. The way you do this, now, when somebody says operating system, we have to face the reality that in the ZOS environment, right, the operating system consists not just of the ZOS as shipped by IBM, but it consists also of the exits and other assorted things that you have defined. So the way validated boot works is in a clean room environment, and I don't mean a chip manufacturing style clean room, but in an environment where you have known and trusted copies of your operating system, your vendor products, as well as your own modifications, you will take that environment and you will sign that package, right? Signatures being stored in places that will be immutable, but validatable by the load process. And then what you do is during the IPL process, right, you of course have to get some certificates loaded into the HMC environment and thus exposed to ZOS. All right. As you push the IPL button, those signatures will validate it. And it's roughly up through the point where LP created. You have some choices, right? You can simply not take advantage of this. You can take advantage of this in warning mode. And if you do, there are some console messages that come out that say, we had a problem. Here's a description of the problem. Or you can do it in fail mode. Fail mode puts you into a wait state. Right. So we did the statement of direction for this a little over 2 years, I think it was. This was delivered last August. It does require ZOS 2.5, and it does require a Z16. Right? But Z16s are small. Buy two. I'll make some marketing person happy. Right? Does require a Z16. All right. We did the statement of direction for data set encryption a long time ago. And that hit the field in ZOS 2.2, really in 2.3. The concept of being to encrypt the data set based on installation defined policy using keys stored in ICSF is not new news. What is new news is the statement of direction that says we will be enabling this for tape support. All of the stuff prior to that was for disk. As Lenny went through all the restrictions, it's basically extended format data sets that are of, there's a whole set of rules for associated with them, right? But tape was excluded. The statement of direction that says that tape will no longer be excluded, but the inclusion is going to have some of the similar restrictions that we had for data sets. In particular, the encryption is being enabled from the access method, right? So if you are your own access method, as RACF is when it's not, it's using VSAM, right? If you're accessing that tape volume using EXCP, execute channel program, that basically means you're your own access method. It does not apply to that, right? But for the vast quantity of tape data that is not stored and read using EXCP, in the future, you'll be able to extend pervasive encryption for data sets to data sets which reside on tape. and it's expected to be, just as data set encryption was, transparent to the application. Right? So our friends, and there's the legal words that say, yeah, this is our plan changes. All right, number 3, and I shout out to Brian Childs at his last session. Actually, no, the shout out will come in the next guy. We have although a shout out to Brian is always good because he's been one of the drivers behind the support. Anomaly detection, notification, and quarantine. IBM plans to provide a solution that will assist you in defining what events represent anomalies, and then the optional ability to do something based upon the detected anomaly, right? And Brian had a lovely discussion in the prior session. Do watch the video for some of the details, some of the choices we have in terms of quarantining the user, quarantining the program, whatever it might be. And why are we doing this? Yeah, it's a great idea, but it turns out that with things like this, then we have the ability to claim that our scanning products and the quarantining together represent anti-malware that meets the requirements of things like PCI DSS. So that's the why. That's a brief peek into what it might do. Look at Brian's session for a much more detailed explanation of some of the thinking going on there. This is the one I wanted to thank Brian for, because I didn't know about this until about 40 minutes ago when I was sitting in his session. Right, GDPS, which used to stand for Globally Dispersed Parallel Sysplex, but I think it stands for something else now. They have announced the ability to consume those detected anomalies and then take an action based upon them, based upon what your policy is. There's the link to their statement of direction. It's a PDF. Look to page 13. There's a couple of other security ones there as well, but this one really caught my eye. Last of the statement of directions, data set simplification, encryption simplification. I have long said that encryption is easy, key management is hard. And in particular, when you start talking about encryption, you start talking about key rollover, right? And the ability to have an encrypted object and change it from one key to another key, because with time, keys might have an ability to have been exposed, perhaps even just by the fact that they've been, they're exposed, or the data is exposed, and perhaps you can mount an attack based upon the volume of data or whatever it might be. But key rollover has been something that folks have asked for a while. Statement of direction says that we will have a software solution that assists in the re-encrypting of data. And this is both for key initial and for initial encryption, as well as for the key rotation and key rollover. And it's intended to meet the requirements of PCI, the Payment Card Industry Security Standard version 4.0. There is a link to the statement of direction. And I always like to finish up with questions, answers, and pointers to places for further information. And I especially like the ones that are presented in an entertaining way. So first, let's talk about a couple of podcasts. Two people who are not strangers to GSE, Marna Wally and Martin Packer. They have a mainframe performance topics. You might look at that title and say, well, that has nothing to do with security. They did one, I think it was at the end of last year, that was all about validated boot. Very entertaining, very well done. And if you happen to be a fan of Nancy Sinatra and these boots are made for walking, that was kind of the theme of it. There's the link to get to it. It's available, or to all of their podcasts. It's available on so many of the common formats. Terminal Talk, another one of my favorites, Frank DiGilio and Jeff Bisty. And I forgot to give Frank a shout out earlier. One of the charts had a picture of a t-shirt that said, "My Papa thinks I'm RACF special." I know a bunch of you started Googling out and seeing if you could buy that. And the answer is no. Frank made it for the birth of his grandchild. I absolutely adore it. Frank and Jeff are two of the most interesting folks. Check out their podcast. I don't think they're ever more than an hour and 5 minutes long. Very entertaining, easy listening, really good introductions to what's new and exciting on IBM Z and ZOS. Our friends over in the performance evaluation and test community, they have a blog. I didn't see anything recent that is security related, but there was lots of stuff there about other topics in the Z environment. So if you want to know more about how to do automation and things like that, they've got stuff there, real world experiences from the folks who are kind of the last test organization in the sense that we do our unit test, our function test, our system test, a couple of performance tests, and then these guys put everything together and see how it works together from a usability viewpoint and how to explain it. Great, great blogs. Do check them out. If you're not reading Red Books, you're missing some of the best free education that's available. These are go-to places, especially they're really good when a new device comes out, like the Z16, to see what's new and exciting about it. But there are some very specific security ones there. It's a little old at this point. It's like 3 years old. It's still one of the best references for getting started with ZOS dataset encryption. All good, all free. Just know they're there. So with time remaining, which never happens.
You've done, I'm so proud of you, Mark. You've done it. Yeah, 5 minutes to spare.
Yeah,
Yes.
questions.
Don't forget, folks, you can unmute your line if you want to put your question in to Mark. Don't be a stranger, don't be shy. And you can also post them in the chat as well if you prefer to do that, and we can read them out.
You know what, James? I didn't hand people chocolate. That's why there are no questions.
That is the thing. Yes. Yeah, absolutely.
So for any other session, if I'm doing it remotely and you ask a question, I will eat a chocolate in your honor. How about that? That worked.
So I did want to pick up on one point, Mark, about the CIS standards, because yeah, you were absolutely right. We had a chat about that at the last security working group, which was in February, and we did a survey. So for those of you that attended that, we published a survey asking for your feedback. Would you like support it? Community-driven standards, which CIS is, and would you contribute, or would your organisation allow you to contribute? Those kind of questions, because we were trying to get a feeler for, the appetite for, is the community out there really interested in supporting this? And quite a lot of people did feedback, and the overall no surprise was yes, they would like to contribute, but the overall preference was that people contribute to those standards through GSE. So it looks like we'll sort of be the landing base. So if you've got requirements that you want to feed into CIS, they'll come into us, and as a working group, we'll discuss them, and then feed those, and someone will kind of enter those into the CIS portal. So we haven't forgotten about it. It's we were just waiting for the survey, just to sort of conclude, and then next week the GSE Security Committee, we've got a meeting, so we'll have a discussion about it then, sort of how best the process is to take it forward. What I will say though, Mark said about you have to put your email address in to be able to download the PDF. Definitely well worth doing. You do have to put in your sign up for it with your email address, and you have to register with a password. But the advantage of that is that, like I did the other day, we were talking about SSH earlier on. I put a question to Mark about SSH. I actually put in a couple of tests that I would like, or standards I would like to see in that domain, which I think are under review at the moment, that might feature in a future release of those standards. So it's a good opportunity for not only to consume the material, but for you to be able to individually add things, that you'd like to see. And also, if you disagree with something, I think is the other thing, Mark, isn't it? That you often see comments in there like, I'm not quite sure about this, or I don't agree with, or can we modify it, but those kind of things. So it's got a community feel about it. Yeah.
Yes, it has all the elements of dysfunction you have in any community. I'm joking. It's actually a very harmonious group. But I do work with a company that says we have the direction that says we must implement all of the controls in the CIS benchmark without exception. I've heard this for DISA STIGs as well. There's actually one case where the DISA STIG recommends something that makes the system not as usable as it needs to be. Right? It's a specific recommendation for a UAC of none on everything, and it turns out that's problematic. In the case of the DISA STIGs, we don't have any leverage other than going to them and saying, yeah, this doesn't work. Whereas in the benchmarks, you can say that it doesn't work in these cases. And the community could say, you act none as required with the following exceptions, in the nodes profile, whatever it might be.
Yeah.
Right. And as I said, we've had two iterations, two turns of the crank through RACF. That doesn't mean it's perfect. It's far from it. We've had some discussions with folks who've approached me privately saying, "Hey, I'd like to see this kind of thing in there." And like, yeah, that's a great idea. Let's figure out how to do it. We can't, in some respects, change the infrastructure because the CIS benchmark folks own that. And by that, I mean every benchmark has a level associated with it, level 1 or level 2. Level 1 means this is necessary for everybody. Level 2 means it's of interest only to those who have specific security requirements. There's no indication in there of how important a particular recommendation is. Controlling APF libraries is of much different importance than perhaps controlling JES spool output. So it doesn't have a way of doing that. And those are conversations we have to have with the folks who own the concept of the benchmark, right, and the tooling therein. So
But
it's
I'm
it's a
very
start.
excited about, yeah, exactly. It's because, and I'm very excited about its future because I think the more people that sign up to it, the more that it's going to go in there, and you can see it's growing. And then some pockets, like we were talking about in February, some pockets of the world never heard of STIGs, and I think this is a something that will, for those organisations that don't want that sort of full fat STIG control, that can take these CIS standards and sort of use them as they wish in their environments. So yeah, got an exciting future, I feel.
We do. It's job security. I like that.
Yes.
All right.
Great. So thank you so much,
Thank you, guys.
Mark, for taking us
Cheers.
through that. This is session 8K, by the way. If you can see there's the QR code. Don't forget to do your feedback. So you can do the QR code, scan it there. My GSE, if you go into your bring your own agenda, you can click on the link there and do it. Or if you just click on the the general main agenda and on the website, click on Mark's session, and the feedback link is down at the bottom.
Yep.
So
the handouts have been uploaded. They didn't have those two things I referred to as I just added a half hour before I started. I will update that shortly.
Thank you so much, Mark. So that's the end of Mark's essay. Thank you once again, Mark, for taking us there. There's some really great updates in there, by the way. I do have a couple of questions, but I'll save those offline for you.
I'll pass that on to the team.
Yes,
they're happy when people we have stuff people want. Okay.
Oh, and don't forget hugs and kisses for Anne Lesher tonight when you see her.
I will do that. And what we're referring to is this is the 60th anniversary of the announcement of the System 360, April 7th, 1964, and I'm teaching a session up at our local library. Got 85 people registered. It's
That's
gonna be
very
fun.
impressive. Yeah.
All right.
Yeah. Great. So we've got a 30-minute, just under 30-minute break now. So at 4:30 UK time, we have our last security session of the day, which I'm very pleased to see Brian Hickenbrook is on this session. It's always reassuring when the presenters are around. So hello, Brian, and we look forward to your session next. It's talking about the fundamentals of ZVM security. So if you have and cyber resilience, so if you have an interest in that area, please do join us. There are of course other sessions running, but we'd love to see you back in the security stream then. So enjoy coffee, tea, breakfast, whatever you're going to have, and we'll see you then. And thanks once again, Mark, for your session.
You're welcome. Take care.
Thank you. Bye.
Looking forward to Brian's session. See you later.
Yeah.